Good afternoon to our wonderful audience and listeners on the replay. Welcome to A Better Future Starts Here, a live weekly show brought to you by the American Society for the Positive Care of Children, otherwise known as American SPCC. I'm your host, Tracy Kawa. American SPCC is dedicated to improving the lives of children in the United States. We are America's voice for children, bringing individuals and organizations to ensure that children are raised in a safe environment so that they may thrive and become healthy, secure future leaders of tomorrow. Our goal is to bring you perspective, knowledge, and support from industry leaders and professionals who are dedicated to improving the lives of children and families. Today, we're happy to bring you Katherine Sellery, founder of Conscious Parenting Revolution. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I love the American SPCC.
Great, wonderful organization. Let me tell you a little bit, let me tell our listeners a little bit about you, Katherine. Katherine has mentored and trained thousands of parents in her guidance approach to parenting with the mindset communication and conflict resolution tools to diffuse blow-ups, self-destructive behaviors, support high self-esteem, and strong centered children who love and believe in their intrinsic worthiness. I love that. Their intrinsic worthiness. Yeah. Katherine is also a trained mediator. She attended law school. She has certifications in different trauma models. She teaches a breathing meditation modality with the Art of the Living Foundation. She ran her own commodities trading business in Hong Kong for 30 years. Katherine is a 3 times TEDx speaker on the topics of The Rebellion is Here, We Created It, We Can Solve It, Surviving and Transcending Unconscious Parenting, and From Overriding My Inner Knowing to Trusting Myself. For her expertise, she's been featured on various news channels across the nation, and she's been a guest on over 20 podcasts. She hosts a comprehensive training for parents and caregivers called the 90-Day Parenting Reset for anyone who wants to reset. She also has a free book on 7 strategies to keep your relationship with your kids from hitting the boiling point. And we'll tell you more where to find out about those amazing resources in a little while. Katherine, again, thank you so much for being here. You have such a compelling story, an incredible journey. I can't wait for you to share some of that with us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how it is that you
Tracy? Yeah, you know, there's an expression, your mess becomes your message. And so I look at my the things that I've gotten to work with and the situation in my own upbringing in my life that have brought me to. Pardon me?
My screen froze just a little bit. Can you just say that one more time?
I can see it's a little bit hazy. I'm not sure the pixelation, a little bit better there. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So I was just saying, you know, our mess becomes our message. And so working through our own messes sometimes becomes our life's work. And I think that's kind of what happened in my life. And so, I mean, I think when I look back on the whole sort of like primary years and the years growing up and my family of origin, it was a his, mine, and ours family. And there were different dynamics as a result that may or may not be common to families that aren't blended. But definitely, if you're in a blended family, you probably have an appreciation for the fact that it creates, different dynamics. And so I got to sort of be bathed from the inside out, really understanding what those feel like and how to make sense of the world. And over the years, there were so many different opportunities to either fall into the victim consciousness or to arise and learn how to sort of make the story the way to craft one's life and to give back and to offer insights, mindset, tools to create the transformation that I think all of us are hoping for. Fundamentally, what it has brought me to is my life's work, which is to be able to keep children connected to their inner voice, knowing who they are, and feeling good about themselves, not because other people necessarily do, but because they do. And the safest way for a child to sustain solid self-esteem is to have a good sense of self. And so the tools and the mindsets are around supporting families to know, what does it mean to support my child to know themselves, to know their sense of things, to trust themselves, because it's the greatest gift we can give them, is to trust themselves and to believe in themselves. I mean, it's the fundamentals of strong resilience. And so that's become my work.
Beautiful.
Did you want me to say more, Tracy, or did you want to interject there?
No, it's just freezing a little bit. It's freezing a little bit. Not sure if it's on my end or your end, but yeah, that is so beautiful. What were the defining moments in your life that caused you to reevaluate and say, hey, this is the direction that I want to spend this chapter of my life?
So when I was in high school, my brother
Did you catch that?
Yes, I did. So when I was growing up in high school, my brother took his life by suicide. And that was a huge tragedy that I found I had been sort of cast in the role of making everybody okay. And so what happened with that tragedy was that even more so did I want to be the overachiever and the one that made everybody feel okay and proud and that they're all right and everybody's going to be fine here. And so it just pushed me more into that direction. I was catalyzed even more so, and never really knew or had a family that had the tools to support the grieving and the integration and the understanding and how to really integrate such a tragedy into one's life. So that didn't happen then. What happened was it just became fodder to be sure that everybody around me was okay, kind of the classic codependent training. And so I was indoctrinated from a very early age to think that I was responsible for how other people felt and that it was my job to make other people okay. And so I continued on that path. That was in my late teens. And then when I was in law school, actually, one of my older sisters died from a brain tumor. And that just knocked me over. It was about 10 years after my brother had died. And that was such a like wake up call for me that I just couldn't, make sense of the world at that stage. I didn't have a large enough context to be able to put these situations into a container and make sense of them. And that's when I just was in the top third of my law class, and I turned to my family and I said, you know what, guys, I need to go and find out who I am. And that was a huge turning point. It was sort of the beginning of me meeting me. I call it the sort of me meet me stage. Where it's the opportunity to reconnect with my own inner sense of things rather than be completely hyper-focused on what everybody else needs me to be, wants me to be, how I need to be for them to be okay. Yeah. And so all of this I've learned to call the external limits of causality, where everything is about how everything else is going.
So basically how the expectation.
Yeah, it's the expectations of other people. It's what other people need. It's knowing, and a classic codependent, you'll ask them, how are you feeling? And they'll say, well, I don't know. How do you feel? So there's a whole sense of trying to find my own feeling realm, and what I'm feeling or experiencing has been so lost. That sense of self within has been so buried, because it's always about not rocking the boat, supporting other people, keeping it calm, making sure the externals are okay. And in service to that necessity of the family matrix, the inner child gets completely disconnected, and certainly got disconnected from me until that moment when Melanie died. And then at that stage, I couldn't just do that anymore. Right. And so I took off, and I literally did the chop wood, carry water. I moved into this little cabin outside of Boulder in Netherlands. And I just immersed myself in Alan Watts and A Course in Miracles. And I started my spiritual journey. And that kind of just, I feel like I've been in the river, just going as wherever the river takes me. And it's been quite a journey, but it's been the journey from the inside out. And it's been the one that's connected to a sense of self and self in presence. And for me to even understand what that means to be self and present, so that I can stay really aligned with my inner voice. Because not being aligned with one's inner voice disconnects one from their core. And if you're disconnected from your core, it's the most fragile place for anyone to be. Yeah.
Melanie, you have such an incredible journey, and I'm catching every other word of this incredible story. I'm thinking maybe we should log out and log back on and continue it. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I've noticed that it's grainy for you. So let's do that. Let's log out, log back in. Okay.
Interesting, but let's log off and then we'll just log right back on. Stay tuned. And we are back and still running live. I cannot wait to hear the rest of Katherine's story. Incredible journey that she has. And again, her organization is Conscious Parenting Revolution. Incredible. Here, I'm going to put the banner up here for anyone who wants to find Katherine. And we're back. This should be better. Is this better?
It's so far better. Yeah.
Yay, we did it. We did it. Incredible journey. Yeah, first and foremost, my deepest, thoughts are with you and sympathies are with you for everything that you have endured with your siblings. And it can't be easy. It's devastating. And there are people in life who take these crises and tragedies and who go down a spiral of negativity. And then there are champions like yourself who take what happens to you and you make it work not only for you, but for everyone. If I can say, making it work for.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
The point is, I really have to applaud the work that you do. Take us forward to an incident that happened with your daughter that you had shared with me that really was the turning point for the work that you do with families.
Oh gosh, I'm wondering what that story was. So I'm not sure which one it is. I have thousands of Pia stories.
It was the school threat.
Pardon me?
The school threat.
Oh,
when you moved back
to the
States,
I think
you moved back to the States.
Oh yeah. So you're talking about when she went to college. Yeah. So at USC.
When you had moved back to the States and then with the schools.
Yeah. So this was
And you
recently.
said,
Yeah. So
yes.
so the most recent situation that I think you're referring to is the one we spoke about the other day, which was basically that I have been in Hong Kong for 30 years. And when my daughter was accepted to USC, we started spending more time here in the States. And what happened was that within about 3 months of her starting, I got a message on my phone, a text message that said that there was a suspected shooter on campus. And that just obviously, like any parent who would receive a message like that, it's absolutely horrifying. And so I was, frantically trying to figure out if she was okay, if it was true, what was going on. And, thank God there was nothing that happened. It was a false alarm. But what it did do for me was it catalyzed me into recognizing that 30 years ago when I left compared to now, a lot happened in the United States of America. It was not the same landscape that I'd grown up in. And that among the people around me who had been here for the last 30 years and hadn't been overseas, there was a different response to that incident than the one I felt. I was just, oh my gosh, we got to do something, everybody, let's go out and figure this out. Where other people's response was, yeah, isn't it too bad? Another school shooting. I can't believe it. But there was a sense of almost like, yeah, it's just the way it is. And for me, it was a
Almost
catalyzing of, yeah. And I had this sense of,
turns into the
oh my
norm.
goodness, this is not ever going to be okay. We can never get to the point where this is it's just the way it is conversation. And so I sensed into myself, what part of me thought this was somebody else's problem, that this wasn't my responsibility, that I didn't need to take some agency, that I didn't also need to step forward and take a stand for bringing a different quality of what's okay to our general state of mind. So with that, I decided, okay, I need to do my part too. And so I went about creating an event that was about a year and maybe about a half ago now. So it wasn't this past COVID summer, it was the summer before. And it was the National Mental Health and Mental Fitness Summit in Denver, Colorado, which happened to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the Columbine High School shooting. And the message that I wanted to bring forward was that we have to collaborate across all of these different hemispheres, being it whether it's teachers, educators, politicians, mental health care providers, parent communities, political sphere. Everybody needs to come together. And my analogy was, it's kind of like that movie where they're trying to figure out how to get the astronauts back to Earth safely. And it was a true story. And I can't remember if it was Apollo 11 or Apollo 13, but I know that one of those missions, they did a whole fabulous movie about it. And anybody who'd ever worked on the Apollo mission was called in the middle of the night across the nation. And a friend of mine remembers her father, who had been an engineer for NASA, was called in the middle of the night when she was a little girl. And they got everybody working on the problem across the nation. And it was this spirit of a rising tide lifts all ships. And if we work together, we can do it. And everybody got together, and by God, they got them down safely. And that was the spirit that was in me, was this sense of, hey, we just got to all be in this conversation together. And I know all of these different sort of pockets are doing a lot of different ventures, and everybody's doing the best they can to crack this. But the upstream initiative, getting way ahead of it, is what I believe is the most important thing that we can do. And it kind of ties right back into parenting. The upstream initiatives can prevent the downstream problems. It's a more complicated approach than just dealing with the Band-Aid of the symptoms, but it's the absolutely necessary approach. And so we had an incredible event which brought together two different presidential candidates at the time, and many, many different spiritual leaders and performers and mental health care providers. And we did a multi-day event where it was not just a talking event. It was a lot about teaching new skills and about what it looks like to see someone in distress and understanding it and how to intervene and not to just have knee-jerk responses to what we call presenting problems, or I call it in my trainings, the manifestations of the unmet needs. And the manifestation of an unmet need is often very sloppy, socially unacceptable, and we're offended by it. And we want to come down hard on it. And we want to deal at the level of the symptoms and get them to go away. But that doesn't work, because the person who's signaling, unless you get to the core underlying issue and give them the necessary support that they need to manage their minds, possibly manage their depression, possibly manage a heartbreak. I mean, the list goes on of what are the problems behind the problem. So I like to look at the level of the symptom.
It's like handling the symptoms, going for the blame game instead of essentially finding the underlying root of the problem.
Yeah, totally.
Is what it feels like you're doing. And from how you were also explaining, you had this wonderfully global perspective that now you could then apply to a vision in the United States of what all of a sudden had become the norm.
Yeah. I think it was really helpful.
This is here now.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I believe in our conversation, I asked you on the phone, do things like this happen in China? Do they happen in, or do they happen around the world? And not there. And
it doesn't happen in Asia. There's nothing like this. So it is a more particular situation, especially I think in the whole world. The place that's facing this the most is America.
Yes.
Yeah. And as we know, we just had a situation recently in Boulder, Colorado. And before that in Atlanta. And I mean, it's been a year of COVID where we haven't seen large scale, we've seen smaller scale. And I think everybody looks at it and they recognize that there's a skills deficit. Pandemic parenting has been extremely difficult for so many families. And I know that I've seen a lot of families that have been okay until the pandemic parenting, because there were what I call resentment flows in the relationships, but those resentment flows were manageable because there would be breaks in the day when people would physically just be apart from one another. And that physically being apart from one another allowed for the temperature to come down, so that when they came back together again, things were kind of reset. But now nobody leaves. And instead of having the breaks to reset, there is no reset, which is one of the reasons why I call my training the 90-day parenting reset, because a lot of families need a reset right now to just completely reboot what has happened as a result of these last few months of shelter in place.
Speaking of which, where could somebody find that 90-day reset?
Yes, actually, you can just type in the 90dayparentingreset.com.
Katherine, I'm glad that you brought up the pandemic, because when you were speaking earlier about coming together, working together to form a response and to put a strategy together to combat what we see going on in the schools, in society. Didn't we just do that with COVID? Didn't we just work around the clock, all different nations together? We did exactly what you're talking about. So why is it so unfathomable for some people to think, well, that's just the way it is. We can't solve this. We can put a man on the moon.
I believe it. I believe it. I believe it. I totally believe it's no different than putting a man on the moon, and no different than addressing COVID. And that this is one of those social initiatives that's just as important. Honestly, I think when Amendment 2 rights get in the middle of the conversation, It just divides the nation. So we intentionally didn't take any position on Amendment 2 because this isn't really about Amendment 2. This is about creating the atmosphere that recognizes what is a signaling behavior and starts to recognize it way before it becomes, I like to say, somebody swinging from a chandelier. People start to swing from a chandelier at the very end of their rope. They don't start there. They start with little signals, little cues and clues, little ways in which their behavior is exemplifying that they're not okay inside, that there's something going on for them that they're not able to manage.
What are some of
their needs? What are some of those
What
behaviors?
are some of those behaviors or signs?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm sorry, it's breaking up. That's why I'm interrupting you. Sorry about that.
I totally understand. So we see those signaling behaviors in lots of different ways. So if you are in a family and you see signaling behaviors, they can look like a slammed door, giving somebody the quiet treatment, giving somebody a shrug, ignoring them. A lot of the signals are the socially unacceptable signals where we then get mad at our children for the way that they're expressing their underlying unmet needs. And we then want to talk about how they're expressing rather than what's the problem behind the problem. So if I can train parents to take a pause around the presenting problem that is socially unacceptable, and of course we don't want it to be there, but it's not the biggest problem. It's the problem behind the problem that is actually the problem, that if you solve that, the presenting stuff disappears. It's like you can take an eraser and it's gone. But if you just keep interacting at the symptom level, how they present, then we activate retaliation, rebellion, and resistance. Then once we've activated retaliation, rebellion, and resistance, we spend 75% of our time dealing with the things that we created from how we dealt with the initial problem. And can you imagine what that begins to look like? You become so disconnected with your children because you get really busy, worried about the way that they presented, and then you start to judge it as disrespectful, inconsiderate, lazy, naughty, bad, all of this stuff. And when you start to give it a judgment, the judgment in and of itself, when you judge someone that way, it actually catalyzes your own feeling inside. There's something for you that comes up as a feeling because of the way you talk about it in your inner dialogue. So in schools, what does it look like? It can look like the things that they would punish children for, the bad behavior. And I would translate, rather than this is a punishable offense, I would translate it into, this is a cue and clue that this behavior, while it's not socially unacceptable, there's nobody who's going to argue with that. It's also not the issue. It's an issue. But the issue is the issue that we're not talking about, which is what came before the problem, or what's the problem that preceded this problem that we can't see, that's invisible to us. We don't see it. It's the one that we need to get closer to. It takes, you have to all think of yourselves as Sherlock Holmes, and you're on this, you get your little, magnifying glass out and you're in search of what's the underlying unmet need. What are the real issues here? Those are the issues that get resolved. When those get resolved, then all of the other stuff disappears anyway. It's a shift in perspective. It's a really big shift in perspective. Yeah.
Peeling back the layers of the onion. Someone who placed a comment in the comment box, and they said things that are unresolved lead to that of school shooting because issues or situations were not acknowledged.
Absolutely.
And the voices of these individuals were not heard when they were young.
Absolutely.
So that's so important. That's an insightful comment. So thank you for sharing that. Katherine, would you say that your pillars are along the lines of conscious parenting, mental health, and wellness?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's the conscious parenting, which, what I found over the years, and I've been doing this for about 20 years, and I've had thousands of people come through the program, is that, the program is designed for parents to become conscious so that they don't pass down through the generations some of the irrational and conscious beliefs that they don't even know that they have. And so it's to support parents in transforming so that they can choose how they're going to address conflict in situations. And what I find over the years is that a lot of the parents, maybe all of the parents, or pretty much all of the parents who come into the training themselves, have within them still some issues from their own childhood that they're still kind of like working through themselves about how maybe they were ignored, or they were treated, or they were made to believe that they were lying or something if they weren't just giving the yes or being cooperative. And they're feeling the unjustness of that. And it was never spoken about. And so it never was released. And they're still needing to actually be with a part of them. I talk a lot about being with. So being with a part of them that's still in pain, being with a part of them that's still hurt, being with that part. And this is really powerful language, because being with something is completely different than being identified with something. And so being with it is literally like, I can turn my head towards something. I can look at this part of me and be with it like it's present over here, but I'm over here and it's there. And we're not the same. We're not merged. But when there's high emotion and there's deep pain, it's very difficult to create self in presence. And that's where training really does support someone. If they can support themselves becoming more and more present to themselves, then they have the ability to turn their head toward this aspect of themselves inside. Now, imagine taking that to a child and starting to give them that support to have an inner dialogue within themselves when they're very young. And that is the secret sauce for them to be able to turn toward also something that's going on inside of them, and to be able to lean into it and be with it with compassion and love and understanding, and to be present to a part that is having a tantrum, to be present to a part that's falling apart, to be with that part. And so this is the language that I would be using in a workshop, where people are learning how to be with it within themselves, and to learn to reflect back to a child, oh, there's something in you, as opposed to you're feeling. Well, there's something in you that's feeling that way. But you're not your feelings, and you're not your thoughts. You are the observer of all of it, and having that sense of centeredness to be with it all, but not merged with it, allows every one of us to be present in a way that fundamentally doesn't exist in the mainstream.
What you're saying is allowing ourselves and teaching our children to be present within ourselves, and to accept every side of ourselves, to acknowledge, to affirm ourselves. And then also to understand that we don't have to embrace those negative attributes. They don't have to become us, but we can acknowledge that that negative feeling has arisen, but then compartmentalize it, to put it in a place where it belongs after having acknowledged it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, pretty much exactly what I'm saying. I would say that when you turn towards something and you pour acceptance, that you can accept yourself just the way you are. I mean, this core of self-acceptance is that there are all kinds of aspects of me, and I can accept this part of me just the way it is. And it can be that way for as long as it needs to be. And I will be with it for as long as it needs me to be present to it. And that self-acceptance is almost the secret sauce to allow something within us to transform.
Wow.
It's just
we have
self-acceptance.
We have a comment or a question. How do children do that when they are unfortunately submerged in a situation that does not allow them to be heard?
Well, that's why it's the conscious parenting revolution. So, I mean, it really is. We have to acknowledge that there's a fundamental dependency that a child has on the adults around them. And the child themselves learns, as I did, right? Which is one of my TED Talks, where it is really about finding my inner voice, which I could not find as a child. It wasn't actually okay for me to have a voice. And so that's why I felt I was silenced. And I was definitely a good girl, and I was an excelling good girl, and I did everything that was expected of someone else. And that's the best that that child was allowed to do. So separation and individuation is like my little drum. I beat it all day long in every training I do. And I talk about allowing your children to separate and individuate. I call it set your children free. Let your children be free. Give them the opportunity to separate, to individuate, to have their own voice. When they say no to you, it is not disobedience. It's that they're saying something inside, yes to something inside. And as the adult, we can be curious about that. And we can see it not as defiance or oppositional or the words that we use to describe a child who says no. We don't usually use that same language if it were an adult that said no. If an adult says no, we're like, oh, okay, well, let's, see if there's another time that works, or, something like that. But if a child does it, and this is like a part of the program, I talk about unconscious bias. There is an unconscious bias that children really are not people too. They are not allowed to separate, individuate, have their own voice. And so this is where I would say we have to walk the razor's edge. And the razor's edge is to be able to recognize that, of course, there is an appropriate role for parental discipline, and that the discipline needs to be what I call the guidance approach. And the guidance approach allows a parent to stay where they are supposed to be, centered within themselves, clear, and have a child who's doing themselves. And they're probably doing it at a developmentally perfectly aligned level, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, going through the scale of what is developmentally appropriate. And teaching children to be considerate of me or their brother or their sister or their dad or their neighbor or whoever, and considerate of other people's needs is so important, and considerate of themselves within that. Because we never want a child to lose connection with their inner voice, because that puts them in harm's way. And then they can be in situations where they need to find their no, and they need to shout it, and they can't because they have been trained not to. And then I'm a stand for that no.
Yes. Yes. To find their no.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Find their no, trust their no, and be able to say their no, even when someone's bigger than them. And I'll tell you, if you don't train your children to trust their no, the power differential that already exists will make it impossible for them to find their no.
Yeah, I'm all for every parent taking your course at the Conscious Parenting Revolution. It sounds like a game changer, for sure.
Game changer. Yeah, it's a game changer.
Tell us a little bit more about where they can find your free ebook.
Yeah, if you go to, you've got it right there, consciousparentingrevolution.com. And once you get there, you can opt into my newsletter once a week. I send a newsletter out and cover everything from sibling rivalry to, getting your kids to do their homework. So there's tons and tons in the newsletter. There's a blog every week as well. So you can check out the blogs, and the ebook. You can opt in for the ebook, which is going to support you with, 7 habits so that your relationship with your child doesn't hit the boiling point.
Wonderful. And I'd like to encourage everyone to follow Katherine Sellery. Sellery on Facebook at www.facebook.com, Conscious Parenting Revolution, and on Insta at Katherine Winter Sellery. And of course on LinkedIn. So you can look up Katherine Winter Sellery. And again, consciousparentingrevolution.com. I love the name. Fabulous. I love the work that you do. We would love to have you back on the show with better reception.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. That sounds great, Tracy. I'm there anytime you invite me.
Awesome, Katherine. We really appreciate you, Leopard Sister.
Yeah,
so
girl.
Thank you
Absolutely. Again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we really appreciate it here today. We'll share your resources. Definitely want to connect you with a couple of organizations. Love the work that you're doing, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the American Society for the Positive Care of Children. So I'm going to just put you on the side for a minute and wait right there for me. So thank you so much to Katherine Winter Sellery. And again, remember, if you are a struggling parent or caregiver, know that you're not alone. The American SPCC.org is here to bring you amazing resources like Katherine Winter Sellery and all of the guests who we have had the past several months. We have a great lineup coming to you in the next month. This is April is the Child Abuse Prevention and Awareness Month. So we have a wonderful lineup of experts bringing valuable, timely, relevant, insightful information. As usual, I would like to remind you to go to AmericanSPCC.org and download the Happy Child app. I cannot say enough good things about this app because it was created by experts, PhDs, neuroscientists, psychiatrists. It's a wonderful gamification tool that, in short snippets, teaches you how to connect with your children, help you understand how the chemicals in their brains work so that you are helping them to establish long-term happiness, not short-term effervescent bubbles that go away, but basically long-term steadfast happiness that set them up for success in their lifetime. If you would like to contribute to the conversation, or if you know someone uplifting children and families in their community, we'd love to hear from you. Please contact us at info@americanspcc.org. Let's make a difference together. Again, visit us at americanspcc.org. Visit our library. We've provided over 5 million parents, teachers, and caregivers with the tools that they need to help children build a brighter future. And that is all thanks to our viewers, donors, and supporters. Thanks to all of you. Let's make a difference together. Visit us at American SPCC to learn how you can help. And remember, a better future starts here.